Welcome to Next Gen Talks, the first in a series of conversations with political leaders and thinkers about how we deliver for the under 45 generation. We're here today with Simon Clarke, former Chief Secretary to the Treasury and Levelling Up Secretary. Simon, thank you for having us.
No, well, thank you for the invitation to join you. Next Gen going from strength to strength.
And I'd love to start by sort of framing the way that we met. We set up Next Gen and reached out to some MPs, and quite quickly you emailed back saying, what's your number? And we had a 45-minute conversation about housing, childcare, the cost of living and tax, and how that really affects the under 45s and how we can win those people back on those points. I'd just like to start with, why for you is that such an important issue?
Well, it's important because I think it's electorally critical, but more than that, because it's economically and morally the right thing to do. If we look at the situation in which the country finds itself, the single biggest inequity in our society is now between the haves and the have-nots, broadly, I'm afraid, defined along generational lines. Young people are getting a pretty raw deal, and that's the fault of successive governments, in truth, but it's a challenge which we need to take up now, because the events of recent years, I think, have compounded the problem to a point which it can no longer be ignored. We have to act on housing, we have to act on tax, we have to act in a way which means that if you're doing the right thing in life and starting out on your journey, that you can see a way to what we would call the classic Conservative success story. And at the moment, too many young people can't, and we have to fix that.
And absolutely, and I think that's the framing for us, that if you do the right thing and you're a younger person, you can go on that journey of affording your own home, starting a family if you want to, and having some money left over.
Quite.
That Conservative vision.
Quite.
And I think the natural place for us to start is probably on housing. And I'd welcome your reflection on the progress that has been made. There's been some good announcements recently, and where potentially we might go further.
Well, you're exactly right to start by paying credit, and it is nice to pay credit for once to something the government's done on housing, which I, unapologetically and enthusiastically welcome, namely the big breakthrough on nutrient neutrality over the summer. So this will unlock 100,000 homes which already have planning permission. So there's nothing further to be done. It's just that those have been blocked by the position adopted by Natural England in response to this legacy EU ruling. And we can fix this without compromising on environmental standards. We're actually going to be spending more money on fixing the nutrient pollution problem. But what we're not going to do is mean that whole areas of the country, I think 74 council areas at last count, are prevented effectively from allowing any new homes to be built. So that is a big win. It's something which I think Next Gen deserve credit for helping to push for. It's creating a climate where this kind of policy is suddenly back in fashion. And I hope it marks the beginning of a wider reassessment of how we can unlock the homes the country needs.
And where do you think we go on, because you mentioned nutrient neutrality, and any particular housing policy, as soon as it's announced, there are naturally a group of people who will oppose it in various different ways. This was an environmental one, other people will talk about overdevelopment or whatever. There is always an issue. So how do you think, and what do you think a Conservative pro-house building programme would look like on a much
on a much broader scale? I think there's a fundamental argument we need to win. That's the first and most important thing to say, that this is fundamentally not a crisis which can be resolved through demand-sized solutions, because we've tried that for most of the last decade. All we've done is exacerbate the problem rather than address it. And I think when you come back to the fundamental contention, it's about supply. You do need to address issues like this one, which are absolutely environmental ones, which are unnecessarily preventing new homes. But then you need to get to the really gritty issue, which is about winning the argument that you do actually need to have some pro-growth measures, whether that be reinstigating targets, which I would love to see. I think that could be done in a way which didn't mean that local concerns were just overridden willy-nilly. I think there is a middle way through on house building targets, but I accept that that is an argument which at the very least is for the manifesto and the next parliament now. But we also need to be looking closely, I think, at unpacking more about the green belt. And I think there is a strong case for looking at this through the lens of some bits of the green belt being truly green, and other bits being, for want of a better word, amber and capable of substitution for other land if there's a compelling case to build there. And often there will be, because the green belt is a real policy holdover from a previous era. Much of the land it encompasses is not of any great environmental value. It's stuff like golf courses or intensive agricultural land. And I do think that a more nuanced assessment as to its actual environmental and social value could unlock more land near the places that we need to build in. And I think that, plus potentially, and finally, allowing communities to capture more of the upside of new homes being built near them, potentially in the form of some kind of council tax rebate, but there are other scenarios which you might look at, would be a powerful package and something which is deliverable in pretty short order, actually, if we just decide there's a political need to do it.
Yeah, because frankly, as you probably have seen the data, it splits roughly across the UK of a third of people own their own home without a mortgage, a third own a home with a mortgage, and a third don't have a home.
Yeah.
So then some of those people who particularly have a home and no mortgage might feel no incentive to have more homes in their area.
Well, and that's where the sort of generational card needs to be played in here. That even for those people in that situation, they have a social contract with the next generation, and often a very personal familial contract with their kids and grandkids. And I do think that most people, when you put it to them in those terms, recognise that this is unhealthy as it stands, and that we need to make sure that people can live in parts of the country where their lives are. And I think, yes, on a purely sort of economically rational basis, you could say, well, go and find a new home in Hull, but with nothing against Hull. If your life is in Hertfordshire, you don't want to do that.
And also, often people based down in London is a millennial city, but that is a productive area of the economy. So we want people to be able to live where there is,
quite
close to where they're working, have that productive link.
Well, London is the most pressing example of all of this, and we've all, seen really appalling stories of, these sort of desperate bidding wars with landlords to try and, have a tenancy accepted, and offering, not just 3 months up front, but 6 months up front, a year up front, ever more conditions, ever more money. I mean, it is insane. It's not just a question of home ownership. It's just a question of having a roof over your head, full stop. And that is a self-inflicted policy disaster, which we need to address.
And often, I think it was Create Streets have coined the phrase about gentle density. And if you look at, for example, London is on a European level not a particularly dense city. So there's room to build up in our cities, and then you might not have to build elsewhere in.
Well, you can certainly need to build less in those areas. I don't think it's. I mean, there's not a dichotomy sort of whereby we can just densify London and not, build elsewhere. But I certainly agree that building up is something which we could do. Street votes would be a really good way of capturing. Both community consent, but also, allowing individual areas to benefit very directly from, as I was alluding to earlier, the upsides of building new homes. And I think you could do that in a way which would actually improve the quality of our cities. I don't know whether you've seen the wonderful AI images of the new Cambridge Quarter, which everyone's been drooling over. That doesn't have to be a pipe dream. That can be within our reach if we are in a mode which is more can than can't do.
And do you think it means, and you've had personal experience as Secretary of State, do you think it means that if we have those areas where we focus on, for example, Cambridge, or London, parts of London were going to be the next part, where you need the Secretary of State to look at an area and really focus on delivering in that particular bit, or do you think it can be UK-wide?
I think you probably want a UK-wide change of policy, but with some specific areas, which might also fall into development corporation status,
Yes.
where you really try and accelerate growth because, frankly, the need is so pressing. And East London, the area around Cambridge, probably actually the area around York. There are some clear examples where we are falling short strategically. And so whilst I would want to see a national liberalisation, I do think that, in fairness, much of what Michael touched on in his speech in, I think, July is really exciting. And the question now, of course, is can we do it?
Yes.
And we heard some pretty ridiculous reasons why we couldn't do the Cambridge plan, including a lack of reservoirs. Well, build some reservoirs, but that just goes to show that this will require ministerial heft behind it to be realised. But that is frankly why we have a government, and why strong national government is still, even in a world of more devolution, absolutely essential.
And then I'd like to talk about our next point, childcare. And we've seen progress in that area.
Yes.
We've got a big announcement on childcare and funding for the under twos. What's your assessment of where we might go next, but also that link between housing and childcare and family more broadly?
Well, I think on childcare, the government is underselling its achievements. So having sort of beaten them up on housing, where I think we haven't been bold enough, I do think on childcare, which is almost as important an issue, frankly, as home ownership, the unbelievable costs of those preschool years in particular. The government there has risen to the occasion, and then we've gone a bit quiet about it. So I think one of the tasks which all ministers, but I obviously wish David Johnson the very best of luck specifically in the childcare brief, need to be taking on is to remind people of this huge opportunity which is progressively being unlocked from this autumn in particular to extend 30 hours of free childcare to not just the under twos, but in due course I think up to children of 9 months and upwards. So it's a material change to what the state does to support family life, and I think that is something which, as it becomes clearer to people that this is in fact happening, will be game changing for a lot of families. So that's really, really positive. I mean, do I think that there is more to be done on this? Yes, I do. I think there is an ongoing challenge around shared parental leave, and in particular attitude towards new dads taking time as well as new mums, and I think that's that's something where there is sort of social change which we need to go through, and I think it's not just limited to the under fives. There's this whole sort of what you do in the school holidays, and we've had this sort of sticking past a solution of a sort of holiday activities and food program, which is great. But can we be more imaginative and stretching in that regard for children right up to 19? Maybe we can actually, in terms of the support that we provide. Not all of which, of course, needs to come directly from government, but there is I think an ongoing programme there.
It's interesting that you mention what might be seen as more socially progressive policies, but I think are actually just more modern, of shared parental leave and things like that.
Yeah.
And where would you place, if you sort of had those levers to pull, those different priorities of more funding, changing the rules around liberalising shared parental leave and things like that, and then also there's things about tax cuts for families, which some people have spoken about. Yeah. Where do you think that suite of?
Well, I think it's a really interesting point, this, because correspondingly we do also need to look at the fact that we are, while giving people more and more, we're also taxing more and more. And I think, in fairness, there is no doubt that from a sort of social equity point of view, direct action on childcare was the right thing to do. Do I also think, however, that the state has been spending too much? That is something which obviously I believe strongly. It's one of the reasons why I backed Liz Truss in 2022, and that that conviction hasn't gone away. I mean, some of these policies are absolutely about saving money. So you think about the billions that the UK spends on housing benefit and that is largely required because of the soaring prices of our housing stock. So there are clear saving opportunities identified with some of the programme that we've been touching upon, which would potentially be recyclable into lowering the burden of tax. And there are other programmes I could point to, particularly around some of our transport spending, where post-pandemic work habits have really changed the pressures on, commuter belt stations. It's probably changed the business case, frankly, quite profoundly for HS2 as well, where you could realise real savings. And this is going to be a constant calibration as hopefully the economic situation continues to ease over the course of the next year or so. I think we will need to go into the next election with something to say on tax. I don't think that anyone is realistically or even fairly going to ask the Chancellor for a massive programme of tax cuts. But I think offering some hope that there is some headroom emerging to lessen that burden. In particular, I think around the threshold freeze on income tax, which is going to be a really painful stealth tax unless we do something about that, would be a very welcome signal to people that, there is frankly a reason to put your trust in a lower tax Conservative government, and hopefully in time an authentically low tax Conservative government.
Yeah. And taxation is obviously a thorny issue, and over the past couple of years, now I think there's a political consensus of either growing the economy and then cutting taxes, or cutting spending and then cutting taxes. And, I think some of the things we've spoken about are pro-growth measures insofar as building homes can be free.
Totally, and obviously, good childcare means that more people can work, increasing the productive capacity of the economy, right?
Yes,
so there is a benefit from that too.
Yes, but then if you're limited insofar as what taxes could be cut ahead of the next general election or whenever in the future, where would you prioritise the burden of tax? Because I think we talk about tax as a general concept, but not on who's being taxed, where are they being taxed, how they're being taxed.
Well, on the personal tax side of the ledger, I think income tax remains the most totemic driver of individual behaviour, and I do think that there is a lot of pain coming down the line between now and 2028 on that threshold freeze. Ideally, I think you would do something on the main rate as well. I think it would send quite a powerful signal about the value we place on work were the 20p rate to go down to, say, 18. And actually, the fiscal cost of that is not that big. I mean, roughly speaking, 1p off income tax is about 5 billion recurring. So it's real money, but it's not sort of treasury exploding heads sort of quantums of money either. But in terms of the signal it sends to the public, I think that would be very, very powerful. If you were to then look on the non-personal side at corporate taxation, I made it really clear at the time that I disagree with the decision to raise corporation tax. Germany, ironically with a centre-left coalition, has just cut corporation tax because they believe that it encourages enterprise, and I see no good reason for us to believe otherwise here either. And in fact, obviously, we spent most of the last decade championing our progress on corporation tax being cut. So I would like to see action there as well. Clearly, there are other taxes which are often discussed, and I accept completely, and I think we should touch on inheritance tax because it comes up so often.
Yes, absolutely.
That there is an unfairness intrinsically to double taxation, right? You pay tax on this and you're taxed again at the point of death. But in the relative scheme of priorities with a constrained fiscal envelope, I can't see how that, which has drawn, frankly, so much attention over recent months, can possibly be a higher priority than the taxes I've just mentioned.
Yeah, and this is a point of contention that NGT has sort of spoken out on, of in that intergenerational unfairness challenge. There will be some workers or some people who won't have intergenerational wealth, who will have a well-paying job, but then will be highly taxed because of that. So I think those voters could be the people that we focus on. If you do well, get a good job, earn some money, that reward there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think if you're going to do anything on inheritance tax at all, you could maybe look at the threshold at which you pay it and reflect the increasing, value of housing stock, having pulled many people into inheritance tax who were never intended really to be within its remit. But outright abolition, I mean, don't get me wrong, there is a Conservative case for it, and I respect it, but I just don't think it's what should be the trump card.
No, absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And in the sort of broader packaging of these things, of housing, childcare, taxation, there is a challenge of winning back the under 45s, as you know.
Yeah, just a few small challenges.
Yeah. How do you think the Conservatives can? I mean, part of it is addressing some of those policy concerns, but how do you think we put that together as a manifesto, or a pitch to those voters to say, look, we understand that intergenerational unfairness has grown over the past 20 years, and this is the way we're going to deal with that.
Well, bottom line is, you can't be fatalistic, right? I mean, there is a school of thought that says, this generation is sort of irrevocably sundered from the Conservative Party. I don't believe that for a moment. In the end, if we are, with clarity and conviction, setting out a package of measures which people, who are no less politically interested because they're under 45, can actually get excited by, and can reasonably see would be really helpful for them, of course they'll engage. At the moment, we have stopped talking to this generation, and as I say, that applies in some cases, as with childcare, even when we are doing things which are helpful, as much as in areas like housing where we're not doing enough. So, that's the challenge for us. It's having a policy. It's then building a narrative and articulating it with confidence and with compassion, because I certainly, as a still under 40, just Conservative, believe passionately that it is in the long-term interests of my family and I, my friends, and my generation, to have a pro-enterprise, successful, outward-facing UK. And I think a Conservative government at its best delivers that. I don't think that a retreat to sort of sterile, soft left, managerialism under Keir Starmer is particularly exciting. And I'm passionate about winning these arguments. But the party does need, frankly, to go on a bit of a journey if we are to do this. And I believe that many colleagues are putting short-sighted political near-term success ahead of the medium-term necessity of rebuilding our coalition among the under 40s, and I understand it, but I deeply regret it, because it is not a route to long-term electoral viability, let alone obviously doing the right thing for Britain.
Do you think, because you are a younger MP, despite being experienced, that you appreciate these issues more because you're closer to having lived through them?
Maybe. I mean, the truth is that I'm no different to lots of other people, in that I look at the quality of home that my peers and I can afford relative to those which my parents' generation could afford, and it's hard not to be angry. And obviously, I'm in a fortunate category. I earn a very decent salary, and I recognise fully there are lots of people who earn a great deal less who are in a position where they are not. I mean, they are not able to envisage a future in a city like London at all. And we just have to to recognise that this is not now a marginal issue. It is fundamental and dominating the life chances of an entire cohort of our society who, no matter what they do, no matter how much they try to save and do the right thing, have the deck stacked against them.
That's very interesting. And do you think that older generations recognise that challenge, or do you think there's also a different job to sell why we might need to focus?
I think there's more to do.
Yeah.
I think there is more to do. I think there's a sort of perhaps slightly willful blindness to how severe these issues have become, and that is something where we can't allow any sort of complacent neglect to obscure, frankly, the starkness of the problem that we have created. And it's not just the Conservative Party's failing. I mean, lest we forget, and we should never let Keir Starmer get away without being reproached for this. Rob Jenrick brought forward a suite of really ambitious planning reform under Boris Johnson. The whole zonal model designed to unlock, reform of a stultified planning system, and Labour campaigned brutally against it when it suited them to do so. And that was only 2 years ago.
Those graphics
Yeah.
on, they're going to build all over the green
Yeah.
belt. And then now have had messaging themselves of, we're going to build all over the green belt.
Quite. So, there has been deep hypocrisy there too. All parties, let's say, I shouldn't, in the interest of a good bit of, fairness here, let people forget that the Liberal Democrats have been probably even worse again on these issues. But the point is, as a political class, we need to do better. We need to start being more honest about the trade-offs and the opportunities involved in building new homes. I believe that we can build well, to a high standard with good design codes, that we can build in a way which folds in good infrastructure as part of the intrinsic proposition. I believe that communities can benefit directly from doing the right thing and hosting new homes, and I believe that the social contract will be strengthened immeasurably by our doing so. It's not rocket science. We used to do it. We've always done it, in fact, going back to not just Thatcher, but Macmillan, before her. So, this is something which the Conservative Party has always, until very recently, put at the heart of our offer to the country, that we will help you to build capital in your life, and the most prominent form of that is invariably a home of your own. We cannot break faith with people now, and we are in danger of doing so.
And do you think we can link that agenda, because the intergenerational fairness issue is linked with low growth and the general performance of the UK economy as a whole, because housing is a drag, fertility rate is a drag, the burden of tax falling more heavily on working people is, and so do you think that is part of the package of how you sell that to the country, of actually many of these issues are issues facing the entire country?
No, James, this is completely right. We sort of turn around and say, well, why is no one having kids anymore? Well, no one can afford to have kids, right? You can't afford to buy your own home. You're in a very tricky position to start your own family. It's really fundamental, right, that people have a decent place to live. And, that, as I say, encompasses renting as well as buying. And we are badly damaging the productive capacity of the UK economy by, this totally artificial and policy-led problem. So, I think that helps. I spent a lot of the last year talking about the necessity of higher growth. These are absolutely economically rational things to do, as well as socially just things to do.
Brilliant, and I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all the work that NextGen are doing, because this isn't going to be a fight we're going to win overnight, but we've got to keep engaging in it, got to keep making the case, and by doing so, creating a party which I believe millions of young people will vote for again. But that's in our hands.
Brilliant, thank you.